Hello and much welcome to 1865 of the Heidegger series. We will continue today with a nice article by Francis Wittgenstein, The Grammatical Nature of Wittgenstein's Private Language Investigation. Last time we went even further into that stage and acting belong together. The stage set, you can call that the surrounding things, the materialism. But there needs to be acting as well to have a theater or theatrical play. It takes two to tango, you can say as well. You mention how the philosopher or the interlocutor goes wrong. So if I may ask, how does that happen? It happens because there are abnormal cases in language that there seems to be very little connection to a doing. I took the liberty of giving an example myself. Use the word truth. Truth is, in some cases, not very participatory. That concept of truth can enter into another region of language, and all of a sudden you start saying things like, there might not have to be an action. I can just think truth in my head. Here we have one in PI 267 that describes an abnormal case of determining, excellent, Kalle, thank you, oh, brilliant. An abnormal case of determining the choice of dimensions for a bridge. Instead of doing real experiments, a person carries out the relevant experiments in his imagination. There's no criterion of correctness in this case either. We're going a bit ahead of ourselves here, but it was an excellent example of abnormal case. So it's within language, it is still following the rules, otherwise we could never nick it for our specific uses. But once it enters into another region, imagine that you are a theoretical construction worker of making bridges, that you want to see the anthropology of it or ethnology. This is when it's going to go a bit astray. That's the instant where the problem starts. Let's look into the examples. We continue where we left off with a cheese example. PI, this is page 17, second paragraph. PI 265 presents a case where someone tries to justify his remembering the departure time of a train by appealing to a memory of the departure timetable. As this is purely done in memory, there's no criterion for telling whether the person really remembers the departure time right. In PI 266, an abnormal case of telling time is presented. Somehow a person does not believe that a clock is correct. He simply looks at the dial of the clock and guesses what time it is. Or he goes to move the hand of the clock till its position strikes him as right. Both of these ways of telling time have no criterion of correctness. PI 267 describes an abnormal case of determining the choice of dimensions for a bridge instead of doing real experiments. A person carries out the relevant experiments in his imagination. There's no criterion of correctness in this case either. All these three cases, together with a diary case, are abnormal cases. In each of these cases, there's no criterion of correctness, and the exercise is pointless. PI 268 likens these exercises to one's right hands giving money to the left hand and aims to make these points clearer. PI 269 reminds us that in normal cases, we do have criteria of correctness, but in the case of language, private language, no one can understand the language. This can only happen when one has no natural primitive expressions or reactions for the sensations described by the private words. In this abnormal case, there's no criterion of correctness, and the practice has no point. Now we come to a much debated section in PI 270. Let us now imagine a use for the entry of the sign S in my diary. I discover that whenever I have a particular sensation, a manometer shows that my blood pressure rises. So I shall be able to say that my blood pressure is rising without using any apparatus. This is a useful result. And now it seems quite indifferent whether I have recognized the sensation right or not. Let us suppose I regularly identify it wrong. It does not matter in the least. And that alone shows that the hypothesis that I make a mistake is mere show. We, as it were, turned a knob which looked as if it could be used to turn on some part of the machine, but it was a mere ornament, not connected with the machine at all. In this example, the diarist discovers that there is correlation between his sensation and the rising of his blood pressure. Whenever he says, "I have S," his blood pressure goes up. It is clear that whether he recognizes pain correctly or not makes no difference. The correlation is between his thinking that he has S and the rise of blood pressure. In this case, there's still no criterion of correctness for his re-identification of S. A rise in blood pressure does not tell that he really has S. It only tells that he would think that he has S. There's no criterion of correctness in the person's S judgment. PI 221 is a section which has attracted scant attention. Imagine a person whose memory could not retain what the word pain meant. So that he constantly called different things by that name. But nevertheless, use the word in a way fitting with the usual symptoms and presuppositions of pain. In short, he uses it as we all do. Here, I should like to say a wheel that can be turned, though nothing else moves with it, is not part of the mechanism. The first sentence in 271 describes a scenario in which a person uses pain in a strange way. The second sentence states that the word pain in this case is vacuous, like a wheel which can be turned, no, though nothing else moves with it. Interpreting PI 271 has been a challenge. In the first place, the scenario described in the passage is imaginable. Secondly, how does this strange scenario show that the word pain is vacuous? Hacker thinks that the scenario Wittgenstein canvassed is not possible, writing no. If he uses pain as we all do, then he does remember what it means. He further thinks that this impossibility means that the first sentence in PI 271 is a vacuous hypothesis. But there is a difficulty with Hacker's interpretation. Even if the hypothesis that the person's memory cannot retain what the word pain means and still uses it as we all do is vacuous. How will this contribute to the argument against private language? Another difficulty is that Hacker thinks that the supposition of a private object that gets identified correctly and which is then described by saying, I have a pain, is the absurdity which Wittgenstein is rejecting in PI 271. But it seems far-fetched to say that PI 271 contains this supposition. My reading of PI 271 is this. It is an example parallel to the cheese example. Wittgenstein here presents an abnormal situation. The person's memory is faulty. He cannot remember what pain means, so that he constantly calls different things pain. But he uses the word in accordance with the usual symptoms and presuppositions of pain. What does this mean? We need to understand what the usual symptoms and presuppositions of pain are. The usual symptoms of pain are crying, grimacing, soothing the injured spot, etc. What are the usual presuppositions of pain? My understanding is this: when the person is in pain, we tend to sympathize with him and to comfort him, etc. These being the presuppositions of pain. Now, how can the person call different things by the name pain and yet use it in accordance with the usual symptoms and presuppositions of pain? I think that he does the following things. He, on various occasions, says, I have pain. Not only when he is injured, but also when he receives good news, has delicious foods, puts on new clothes, etc. And on each such occasion, he cries, grimaces, or rubs a certain spot, and also expects others to sympathize with or comfort him. He also points to various objects and says, it has pains, and tries to comfort them. He therefore says of an object himself, another person, or even an object, X has pain, as if X has pain, as if X has pain. But if we observe his behavior for some time, we will see that he uses pain randomly, although every time he gives a pain performance, thus, although he uses pain frequently and uses it in accordance with usual symptoms and presuppositions of pain, he does not have a criterion for determining whether X really has pain when he says X has pain. So his word pain is useless. It is like a wheel idling. To sum up, PI 265 to 271 are not part of the PLA. Rather, they act as the objects of comparison. They present some cases analogous to the diary case. And aim to help us to see that in each of these cases, there's no criterion of correctness, and that the practice is pointless, useless. 9. Conclusions and comparison with previous interpretations. This paper has three main results. First, I show that Wittgenstein's PLA is a grammatical investigation. The definition of private language implies that the private speaker has no natural expressions for his alleged sensations. This implies that he has no criterion of correctness for using his private words, which is a grammatical thesis. This, with the help of the grammatical rule, N or FR, implies that private language is senseless.
Senseless.
The PLA is thus a grammar-based reasoning, and it involves no hypothetical, disputable, or statements. Second, I showed that Wittgenstein provides a diagnosis of the error committed by the philosopher who thinks that private language is possible. The error is that the philosopher failed to make some all distinctions and the normal abnormal distinction. In other words, we can go to the next page. In other words, he has failed to see that when there are no natural expressions for sensations, talking about sensations becomes senseless.
Senseless.
Third, PI 265 to 271 are not, strictly speaking, part of the PLA. The role of these sections is providing objects of comparison. To help us see that there's no criterion of correctness in the case of private language. Before ending this paper, I would like to compare my interpretation with previous ones. A full comparison would need much more space than available here. What I would like to do is to discuss some of the novelties that I think exist in my interpretation. First of all, on my interpretation, grammatical rules are indisputable and are known. As I argued in section 2, the indisputability of grammatical rules can explain Wittgenstein's meta-philosophy well. Moreover, I also argued that certain indisputable things must be assumed in any interpretation in which Wittgenstein is thought to dissolve philosophical problems. I suggested that these indisputable things are grammatical rules. Not only can the indisputability of grammatical rules explain Wittgenstein's meta-philosophy well, it can also explain how Wittgenstein dissolves the problem of private language. He shows that it is a grammatical thesis that private language is senseless. Many previous commentators also talked about grammar, but they haven't paid sufficient attention to the indisputability of grammar. They have not explained, generally speaking, how Wittgenstein dissolves philosophical problems based on indisputable grammatical rules. I think that is juicy enough or beefy enough. I put a little mark here. You may, Kalle. Do note the last word. You're very good at that. Last word being grammatical rules. 1865. We have 14th of October. And we have 10:45. Let me go and have a little look at what's interesting, because it was quite a lot, to be honest. This dense text is becoming even more dense towards the end. How that is even possible. So we are off to page 17. The very first line that we read there, PI 265, presents a case where someone tries to justify his remembering the departure time of a train by appealing to a memory of the departure timetable. As this is purely done in memory, there's no criterion for telling whether the person really remembers the departure time right. So these examples constitutes help for understanding that there are abnormal cases and how they look, sort of. So this could happen. It's very abnormal even, but that is not the regular rule. Do look out here. For me, this doesn't fit the usual model of either or. There are here exceptions. And I think that's very telling of the philosophical investigations. It looks at how reality is, and it's constantly with exceptions. This is what makes it real. In PI 266, there's another example. Somebody guesses the time, but looks at the dial. It could be correct, it could be wrong, but he doesn't do FR. he doesn't follow a rule. So my guess here in big paper emphasis like triple ones is that in the end, maybe as months passes, he would lose his capability of actually telling the time. I have an example. I used to participate in a very Swedish sport. It's going into the woods, you get a map, you get the compass, and you need to find certain things that you register. There used to be, I think, like 10 goals you need to find with help of your map and with help of your compass. If I went to a certain area many times, with the combination of my skills, the compass and the map, I got a feel for what was north and south, east and west. So I've been following a rule for months, so to speak. I can put the compass to rest. But it could happen, and I think sometimes it did happen. I lost my ability in the abnormal cases to tell where, I think it was southwest was. But it went on. I could tell north for a very long time, maybe years. So you see now, there are exceptions where we don't follow a rule anymore and it works, but it works only for a while. That's the point he's making. In PI 267, it's the building of a bridge. And he does the relevant experiments in his imagination. There's no criterion of correctness in this case either. So think of this as this is my suggestion. In early stages of the Industrial Revolution, shortly after the Principia of Newton in 1689, there was no one who did these things. But as time progressed and people followed rules a lot, somebody could be sitting somewhere and just think about these things. These are abnormal cases, and I think by time they got the concept of theory, just doing it on paper or in the head only, with no connection to practice or following a rule. That's where the problem started. So my guess is this has become much more frequent. It has happened before Newton, without any doubt whatsoever, but it has definitely become much more frequent to do this mistake. One reason is technology. It's all around us. It wasn't really a thing on Newton's time. So the risk of Newton falling in this trap was very small. Now we are surrounded by things. We can follow a rule to maneuver or understand their workings. So could you go down to the quote here from 270. At the end of that, I think it's rather grand. I love it. In parenthesis, Wittgenstein writes, we as it were turned a knob that looked as if it could be used to turn on some part of a machine. of the machine. But it was a mere ornament, not connected with the mechanism at all. He can very well imagine that in the late 40s when he wrote this. Today, this happens on a daily basis, many times a day. We move the mouse, we do something on the computer, and to tell whether it's illusory or it really has an effect is almost impossible. We are deemed to fall into the trap much easier. Take the net, take all these applications. We don't know if they do something as we tell them to do. And most often, as we know, they don't. So we're losing our following a rule, good habits by the computers and poof, all the other advances of technology. That might be, and this in parenthesis, I want to bring this up on another lecture. There might be an implicit warning against technology taking over. Especially, well, in the case that we do not understand what following a rule is. Otherwise, we would be safe. At the end of that page, we have a mentioning, well, rather similar. The last sentence, here I should like to say, a wheel that can be turned, though nothing else moves with it, is not part of the mechanism. Indeed. If we go to the next page, please, Kalle. And here, I would just be a bit more brief here. It's talking about pain and somebody who's just setting up pain. Somebody use pain in a strange way. And the word pain then becomes vacuous, like a wheel which can be turned, though nothing else moves with it. Pain has to be there. There has to be a reaction. And of course, as time goes by, we get so used to have pain that we can start say, oh, it's an internal pain. I only feel it internally. Well, of course, you're so used to it. So you forgot the connection. It's the amnesia. But you still need to have a pain reaction somewhere. Needs to be there. There are types of anesthesia that stops your body from reacting completely, and they help to take away the pain. But the problem with them, we are so connected to our illusory feelings that so maybe that's enough to produce some sort of pseudo pain if we see the knife entering into the belly to have our appendix removed. So we are deeply connected to our acts. And in the second paragraph, there's some mentionings of that. We go down like 15 lines. Now we can start 8 lines. When a person, it's a bit more up. Yeah, there you have it exactly. When a person is in pain, we tend to sympathize with him and to comfort him, etc. These being the presuppositions of pain. Remember small children. If you overemphasize, hey, little kiddo, you fell, the pain will intensify. But if we ignore it, the pain will succeed. So the surrounding people, the caretakers, the loving ones are also part of the pain. And you see how complex this relation is, how many threads there are connecting everything. And we will go further down. We say this vacuous pain, and the person in the example is, he says, I have pain not only when he's injured, but also when he receives good news, has delicious foods, put on new clothes, etc. And on each such occasions, he cries, grimaces, or rubs a certain spot, and also expects others to sympathize with him or comfort him. Well, that is a vacuous pain. It's not connected to the proper criterions. He is not following a rule. It's not up to him to have pain by demand. So his word pain is useless. It's like a wheel idling. Remember last part, last edition, when we said actor and stage come together. We need the space in between the actors. We need the air to have a play. What surrounds us is the FR, following rule. If you have pain and someone helps you, that person is also part of following the rule. In Indian languages, Amerindian, we learned from an Indian good friend who came over here, Tivka Singh from the Lakota tribe, that in his language, pain is not something internal. It couldn't be, because they have no means of objectifying. Cannot say, what is it? So it's more like paining. You do it together or you do it alone once you got the ability. But it's participatory and it means a lot. So in his language, the risk of falling into these traps are much less, if there even is a chance. The next subchapter 9. So these paragraphs are helping us. 4th line, this with the help of the grammatical rule N or FR implies that private language is senseless. That's the first move. Second, a bit further down, I show that Wittgenstein provides a diagnosis of the error committed by the philosopher who thinks that private language is possible. So it's a massive strike And in some sense, he also adds that the PI 265271 are not strictly speaking part of the PLA. The role of these sections is providing objects of comparison, the next page, to help us see that there is no criterion of correctness in the case of private language. Go to if we can go to the end of the third paragraph. Many previous commentators also talk about grammar, but they have not paid sufficient attention to the indisputability of grammar. They have not explained, generally speaking, how Wittgenstein dissolves philosophical problems based, and listen now, indisputable grammatical rules. That is enormously important. They need to be indisputable, otherwise they don't work, and they are indisputable. Kalle Lundahl, dear colleague, please enter. Do not forget to speak directly into the microphone, please.
Let me comment on the theme of hand in this paper. We had this in the example first with more, but I will not repeat it. Today we had the word hand in a different way. We had in the hand of the clock, but it's this phrase that I like to mention. PI 268 likens these exercises to one's right hands giving money to the left hand and aims to make these points clearer. So this is so if somebody says to me that I have my own private religion, you could use this example from PI 268. It's like a right hand giving money to your left hand.
Very good. Very good.
And let me also take up the Roy Hangs by Escher. Which illustrates Wittgenstein's point. Roy Hangs by Escher, it's from 1948. So in this case, this I think illustrates the problem of private language. The left hand is drawing the right hand, but in order to get rid of the illusion that this is possible, you need an observer, a beholder.
Yeah, definitely. And
it's not enough that you are doing the observation. You need actually a second person. Who can this person understand you? Do you think, Hans, that this illustration by Escher can illustrate the problem of private language?
Yeah. Yeah, taken in a different way, definitely, yeah. You need a person there who knows how hands works.
This is like the wheel that Wittgenstein mentioned.
Yeah, very good, yeah.
So they're only turning on their own, but without no purpose. And you have only purpose if you have an observer.
possibly, Kalle, an alien wouldn't understand this, wouldn't be able to say, oh, it's a problem here.
Let us remind us what
Makes
was.
full sense. Very good.
Now today it was actually only this that I wanted to mention. So I hand it back to you, Hans.
Okay. Well, just let me make a short summation. It's been sadly missed by most interpreters of Wittgenstein, the weight of these paragraphs. They are, strictly speaking, not part of the private language argument, but rather, and this shows the sharpness of the Wittgensteinian mind, they are there to show that there is no possibility of an alternative. It is almost like he included a critic in his text, and now it's even stronger than the normal critic of the interlocutor Frege. And example after example, he gives of this abnormity. And these are all possible cases. I've done them myself, and I'm starting to understand. To be perfectly honest, I usually skip these paragraphs as well. And so did Hacker and Skov von Richt. This is the problem with cherry picking when you read a text, which always inevitably happens. It's unavoidable. A lot of great stuff in this text. I say thank you very much for jumping in, Kalle Lundahl. Good example with the hands there. An alien wouldn't be able to tell that that is not something possible. We can. That makes us human. Our skills to use hands are an important part of understanding what hands are. And in this day and age, when people are using more and more vacuous language, this is a help. It's a gift. It's a precious gift, I would say. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Have a very pleasant day, morning, afternoon, evening, or night, wherever you are. Bye-bye for now.